الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My respected brothers in Islam, welcome to the 13th session of the IPCI Comparative Religion course. We're almost at the end. We got only 2 sessions to go after this. And today's session and next week's session is both on the same topic, which are common questions that you're likely to face about Islam. In the last week, we had 2 debates, and in these debates, the Christian person who I was debating raised basically 3 points in totality against Islam. So before we start with the common questions that I prepared, I thought it would just be good if we discuss the objections that he brought forward, so everyone here knows how to answer it. So in the first debate, we were talking about salvation and how to attain Jannah in Islam and Christianity. And so one of the arguments that he brought an ayat of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to say, وَمَا أَدْرِي مَا يُفْعَلُ بِي وَلَا بِكُمْ. I don't know what's going to become of me and what's going to become of you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, tell the polytheists of Makkah that, you know what, I'm not some new kind of messenger, I'm not claiming to be an angel, I don't even know what's going to happen in the future between me and between you, I don't know. So the pastor uses this verse to then say, see, the Prophet Muhammad didn't know whether he was going to heaven, na'udhu billah. Therefore, if he wasn't assured of going to heaven, then no Muslim is assured. Therefore, Islam doesn't make you sure of going into heaven. Right? So that's the entire argument as he phrases it. So the first point that you have to realize is whether you have assurance or not is not a sign of whether your religion is true or not. So if you have the most sure religion, it doesn't mean you're true. And if you have the least sure religion, it doesn't mean that you're false. So there's no correlation between assurance and truth whatsoever. So that's just the first thing to note. The second thing is, every single commentator of this verse, as I mentioned, says that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking about in this world. Remember, this verse was revealed early on in Makkah. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, see, he's preaching the message in Makkah, the people are persecuting him. He's saying, please accept the message. And now, if you read parallels, this is the thing that most Christians don't understand. Throughout the Quran, you see Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "La aqulu lakum inni a'lamul ghaib." I don't say that I know what's in the thing. I don't say that I'm an angel. I'm just a messenger from God. I do whatever God says. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is emphasizing to these people that I am a messenger from Allah. Whatever Allah informs me, I know. Whatever He doesn't inform me, I don't know. And this is just another way of saying, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in this world. It has absolutely nothing to do with what's going to happen in the hereafter, whether Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is going to Jannah or not. In fact, in the hadith, we see Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam clearly mentions that Ana Sayyidu Wuldi Adam Yawm al-Qiyamah. I am going to be the leader of the children of Bani Adam on the day of Qiyamah. I mean, he's going to be the first to enter into Jannah. Nabi Sallam says that my ummah came last, but we will be the first to enter into Jannah. If you look at the Quran says, وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولِ. Whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, and you know in many parts of the Quran it says will go into Jannah. In this part it says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِم مِّنَ النَّبِيِّينَ. Whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger, then instead of saying will be in Jannah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a way of saying that you'll be in Jannah, says you will be with the prophets. So it's synonymous in the Quran that the prophets are obviously going to be in Jannah. That's why when Allah promises you your reward for obeying Him, He says what your reward is going to be? You're going to be with the prophets. So that's obvious. He doesn't even say Jannah. He just says because anyone knows, okay, obviously the prophets are in Jannah. So 3-part answer to this question: assurance and truth, there's no link between the two. Secondly, almost all commentators, I think it's virtually unanimous that they say, I don't know what's going to happen with respect to this world. And thirdly, this in the Quran and in the Hadith, we find this complete consensus on this, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and all of the Anbiya will be in Jannah, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam will enter Jannah first. So that was the first objection. It was a really simple, easy objection, nothing major there. Then yesterday we saw 2 other common objections. The first objection that he did raise, and that I didn't get a chance to actually answer, was he says, see, in the Quran it says, يَجِدُونَهُ مَكْتُوبًا عِنْدَهُمْ فِي التَّوْرَاةِ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ. And we did discuss this verse in our classes here, that it says that the people at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam found Jesus mentioned in the Injil in front of them. And so that means the Quran is saying that the Gospels are true because Injil means Gospel. Right? So he's saying, his whole point last night was to prove that the Gospels are true. So he's saying that, see, the Quran is saying that the Gospels were there. These are the same Gospels. Therefore, the Gospel is true. But we have to understand something. When the Quran is saying Injil, it has nothing to do with the Gospels whatsoever. How do we know that? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْإِنْجِيلِ. We gave Isa alayhi salam the Injil. Did Isa alayhi salam have any of these Gospels in front of him? No, these Gospels were written well after him. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one verse he brought up where it says, وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ, that the people of the Injil should judge with what Allah has revealed inside it. Meaning Allah is emphasizing that don't judge with whatever other books you have, judge with what Allah has revealed inside, because what they have in front of them now, parts of it will be what Allah has revealed and a lot of it is not going to be. So there is no absolute, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the Injil and this and that, He's talking about the revelation that was revealed to Isa alayhi salam and not the Gospels that we have in front of us today. And an easy other way of understanding that is Gospels is plural and Injil is singular, so it's not talking about the same thing at all. So there's absolutely no correlation between the two. He used one other verse where he says, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ أَقَامُوا التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ. If they had to uphold the Torah and the Injil, then they would have found good things happening to them. But this verse is in the past tense, meaning it's talking about at the time of the messengers when this was revealed. If they had to do that, then good things would have happened to them. So all of those objections really, again, not a very strong objection. The third one, and this is the one that he brought up, this is a strong objection in the sense if it's done properly, and we as Muslims need to know the answer to this. So when I brought up, obviously in the Bible, there's all of these different variant readings, there's these different verses that have been taken out, that have been removed, and this and that. So he said, but you get also two types of Qur'ans, because you get Hafs and you get Warsh. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you heard the Qurra reading, then they read, sometimes they read Maliki Yawmiddin, sometimes they read Maliki Yawmiddin, sometimes they say Musa, sometimes they say Musa. So now Christians have latched onto this and said, okay, this is a way we can sneak out of this problem, because we can say, see, you also got different ways of reading, we also got different ways of reading, so your problem is my problem, it's the same thing. That's the objection that they're going with. So you have to make it very, very, very clear to them that these two things couldn't be further apart. Number one, the variants that we're talking about with the Christians happen because a person wrote something wrong, because he inserted a verse in, because he took out. These were deliberate changes happening to the texts. The differences in the recitation of the Quran all track back to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this is a very important hadith. It has been reported by, I'll say, over 20, maybe 30 Sahaba have reported this hadith, when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Unzila al-Qur'anu ala sab'ati ahruf kulluha kafin shafin." That the Quran has been revealed with various modes of recitation and for purposes of ease. And all of these modes of recitation are sufficient and they convey the message. So when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to Medina, there were lots of different Arab tribes that came to him and said, for us to memorize something, remember they didn't have written materials at hand and the dialects were very different. For us to be able to memorize it, we need to be able to recite it in our dialect, and sometimes using the synonyms that we are used to. So the dialectical differences amongst the Arabs were great, and this became very apparent when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam moved to Medina especially. And this is where these ahadith were mentioned, and this is where this whole understanding of sab'atu ahruf came from. So we find in multiple hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches a sahabi how to read the verse in a certain way, and he teaches another sahabi how to read it maybe slightly differently. But everyone was aware of this. That's why, the most famous surah in the Quran, Surah Fatiha, which is read every day so many times, Maliki Yawmiddin, Maliki Yawmiddin. They knew that both of them were recited. And so the difference here is all these variants track back with authentic chains to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Therefore, we shouldn't even be calling them variants. They're actually different ways that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that it's legitimate to read the Quran like this. And all of them have not one chain of narration, multiple chains of narration. Now compare that to the variants of the Christians, which is like, people just making mistakes, people taking things out. There's a world of difference. There's no way you can compare the two. And then the objection that the Christian generally makes after that is, he says, well, if the Prophet ﷺ said you can read the Quran like this and like that, that must mean there's two Qurans or there's three Qurans. So a very simple answer to that is that just as you talk about God and He has multiple names, it doesn't mean there's multiple gods. You can call God Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. It's all referring to the same thing. Similarly here, Nabi Sallallahu said, for Malik, you can say Malik, Malik, Malik. You can say the same thing. It's referring to the exact same thing. So that was the third objection. That one, of course, will require, to do the full explanation, will require another course on its own, but just an easy, quick way of understanding how to respond to that. I just chose a few topics that we can talk about that Muslims generally get asked about. The first is LGBTQ. That's a very famous topic nowadays. So we're going to talk about homosexuality and transgenderism in Islam, two different things. Then we're going to talk about evolution. Then we're going to talk about the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. And then we're going to talk about slavery. So these are big topics, they're common topics, but we're not covering as much as we could have. So LGBTQ, what do the letters stand for? L stands for lesbianism, G stands for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, and Q for queer. Now, basically what we're talking about here is two people of the same gender who like one another and want to get married and do all of those things. Now, Allah protect us from that. So what is the Islamic ruling on homosexuality, right? The Islamic ruling, we're going to look at that first, then we're going to look at is it biased, then we're going to look at what's the reason for that, and the Islamic ruling on transgenderism. So we're going to cover all that now as quickly as possible. So the Islamic ruling is this, that the action of homosexuality between two men or two women is completely haram. And there's been no difference of opinion from the time of Sahaba right up until today. And although recently some people are saying, no, it's a matter of, there's nothing like that. You can go through every single book of every single scholar, not one of them will tell you there's a difference of opinion on this, that homosexual acts are completely prohibited. So the Islamic stance of that is extremely, extremely clear. And we read the story of Lut alayhi salam in the Quran, and there's multiple ahadith on the topic as well. So the action itself is completely haram. The second thing is the feelings that you may have. A person, let's just say Allah protect us, but someone has these feelings. Him having those feelings doesn't make him a sinner, doesn't make him someone who we have to look down on, go start hitting him, and we have to actually help him, treat him, make him feel better so he doesn't fall into these acts. And the third thing is when it comes to beliefs. So you might get someone who, he doesn't take part in these acts, but he says, no, it's permissible, you can do it if you want to. That person is on the verge of becoming a kafir. Why? Because you are rejecting something in Islam that's categorically proven. It's proven from Quran, it's proven from Hadith, it's proven from the consensus of all the scholars. So when we look at the Islamic ruling, we look at it from three aspects. One is the action itself, completely haram. When you look at the second aspect, we look at it from is the feelings that a person might have, Allah protect us, those feelings does not make the person a sinner. The third thing is your belief. As a Muslim, you have to believe what the Quran and Hadith is saying, which is that it is prohibited. Now the third thing is many people say that no, what was happening in Lut alayhi salam's time was the men were going, and I know we have to use this language now, but they were raping other men. That's why Lut alayhi salam was prohibiting that. He wasn't prohibiting homosexuality. That's what a lot of people today are saying. And an easy answer to this is, Lut alayhi salam told them that these are my daughters. If you want, why you don't take them instead of the men? So you think Lut alayhi salam is telling those people to rape his daughters? Obviously not. So it's easy answer to that is to see that it wasn't that. It was actually normal homosexual acts which the Quran is prohibiting, which Lut alayhi salam is prohibiting. Now the next objection that generally comes, people say, but you're biased. Why you discriminating against people who are like this? You're only favoring people who like the opposite gender. So Islam is not biased in any way. Islam has a set rule. Sexual actions can only take place between two people of the opposite gender under a nikah contract, between a man and a woman who are allowed to get married. Therefore, if you're not married to a woman, you can't do anything with her. You know what I'm saying? If you have some feelings for someone who, like your auntie, who you're not allowed to get married to, Allah protect us, you can't do anything with her. It's not biased. This is the rule. This is the Islamic rule that's there. It doesn't discriminate against anyone. There's a rule is there for a certain reason to protect the family, etc., etc. Now, the most common objection you're going to get is this, that these two people, these two men here, they're not harming anyone. They're both happy with what they're doing. They're consenting. So why are you interfering with their life? Why are you troubling them? Just leave them alone. Let them do what they want to do. So that's what's known as the harm principle. And atheists use this a lot. The harm principle means if they're not harming anyone, then they can do whatever they want to do. Now this is a secular principle. Islam does not subscribe to this at all. Islam looks at the broader picture of things. Islam looks at the effect on the society, the effect that can happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years, which most human beings are unable to see, and we're going to talk about that just now. So according to that logic, then incest, Allah protect us, should also be allowed. If a mother and a son want to do something, they're not harming anyone, so you must allow it also. And people who think like this, atheists, have actually said, yeah, it's allowed. If one lady wants to do something with a dog, it's allowed. Why? Because they both consenting, no one's saying anything wrong, so why stop them? So you can see what a path this kind of thinking leads down to. That once you say, so long as you're not harming anyone, let them do anything, this leads you down a very, very dangerous path. Now, the reality, though, in this whole thing, which people are not going to tell you, is they are harming people. So we don't even agree that they're doing something on their own. They're not harming anyone. They are harming people. And look at these statistics. And these statistics are not so easy to find for some reason. If you just Google them, they won't come up. You have to go to the papers. 78% of homosexuals have STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, which is running rife throughout the population. They make up 2% of the population, homosexuals, right? But 67% of AIDS patients. So 67% of AIDS patients, these statistics are all from America, but they only make up 2% of the population. They make up 2% of the population, but 51% of domestic violence cases between partners come from them, although they're only a small minority of the population. They represent 33% of pedophile rapists. Now, I must remember also, what they're doing is completely unnatural, against the way of the human being. Therefore, a man was not created to have intercourse with another man. It wasn't, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't make it like that. So when they engage in these acts, a lot of very disgusting things happen, and they suffer from a lot of diseases. So 58% have intestinal worms and other horrible diseases. And I didn't want to list them here because it's like you don't even want to say it. They have around 80 partners a year. So they have multiple partners. They leave one. Now what happens then? Someone adopts this. Think about this, right? A single parent home where there's only one parent in the house can be a very destructive thing for a child. And if you look at prison statistics, 70% of sometimes prisoners come from single parent homes. It's difficult. Now, when it comes to these homosexuals, if they're adopting a child, they don't stay with each other for very long. So every time they adopt a child, what happens? Single parent homes. Breaks up the entire society like that. So we don't even agree to the principle that they're not harming anyone. They are harming people. You may not be able to see it now, but in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you see the effects in society after that. And the last question you might get asked on this topic is, but see, these people, they're like this, and everyone is harming them, everyone is looking down on them, they don't have their rights, so why you don't just wear the rainbow colors just to support them? You don't have to say they're doing is right, but just support them because people are harming them. So the very easy response to that is, if we had to rank the groups that were really oppressed in this world, these people wouldn't even make it in the top 100. There's people who literally their lives are in danger every day. Look at people like the Palestinians. Look at other people who are living around the world. Now you don't want to support them. You don't want to support the people who are suffering, their lives are in danger, but you want us to wear a rainbow badge to support some other people whose lives are not in danger at all. And you see, it doesn't make sense. And wearing that band, the rainbow, is tantamount, no, it's not the actual rainbow, but it looks very similar to it. It's tantamount to supporting the entire movement, and that movement wants to change the way Islam views this. And the more you make it popular, the more you support it, the further it spreads. So we as Muslims, inshallah, we will never ever wear such a thing. We will never ever support such a thing. So that's got to do with homosexuality. The next thing, the T, stands for transgenderism. Now, what's transgenderism? It comes from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a thing which people say exists, but we don't know if it really exists, where a person is a man, but he's feeling like he's a woman. He's a man's body, he's a man, but he's saying, I'm feeling like I'm a woman. Or a woman is in a woman's body, but she's saying, I'm feeling like I'm a man. Now, so what happens? In America, in the liberal West, what's happening is they're telling these people take hormone blockers, they're doing surgery to them, and they're literally changing their bodies from male into female and from female into male. It's a common occurrence at the moment in America. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes the words of Shaitan in the Quran where he says, فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. About Shaitan, فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. He will try and change the way Allah has created human beings. And go see what's happening in America right now. This is literally happening. 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds are being encouraged to take hormone blockers and all of these other, puberty blockers and all of these other hormones to change their gender from male to female just because they feel like they're a woman when they're in a man's body. So Islam is obviously completely against this. And the repercussions of this are only being seen by those who did the surgery 10, 20, 30 years later. Now after that, or some few years later, they realize that horrible things are happening to them because the surgery goes wrong. You are a man. You cannot be changed into a woman no matter what happens. And you see what's happening to these people. Even with the best of surgeries, they're regretting their decision completely. So Islam is very clear on this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created two genders, male and female, and whichever gender you are born with, that's your gender, not whichever gender you feel you are. You are the gender that you are born with. And it's as simple as clear as that. Now, there's a few other points on the topic, but inshallah we don't have to go too deep. So that was LGBTQ. I just as a summary there, Homosexuality is on one side, the act is haram, we have to believe it's haram, but we don't estrange a person who may have those feelings, and we don't have to support LGBT in any way. It has a lot of harms for society, and the Islamic ruling is filled with wisdom that many people may not be able to see immediately. Transgenderism, where a person wants to change from a man into a woman and a woman into a man, Islam is completely against this. There's no such thing as that in Islam. Okay, so now let's change mindset completely. We're talking about something totally different now. We're talking about another topic, and that's the topic of evolution, right? Because these are common objections that are going to come. So what do we mean when we say evolution here? You need to understand this clearly and technically. When we say evolution here, we're talking about Darwinian evolution. Darwin was one of the people who came up with his own version of the theory of evolution. And we're talking about the idea that all life that we see around us today, all of the species, came from one organism which evolved over time, again over millions, maybe billions of years, and it evolved into all of the species we see today, right? That's the basic idea of what we're talking about here now. The evolution itself doesn't have to do with whether the universe was created by a creator or not, or whether life itself started with a creator or not. That's abiogenesis, that's another topic. Here, this topic is dealing with, you have the first organism. Did evolution occur from this first organism and result in all of the species that we see around us today or not? So once we understand that evolution is only talking about that, it's not talking about whether this is a creator or not, it's not talking about whether the first life form was created or not. That's not technically in the picture when we're discussing evolution. But evolution is discussing the mechanism whereby all of the species in the world we see around us came about. So what's the issue Islamically? Now, many have viewed evolution as removing the creator from the picture. Because evolution is stating, for example, that maybe the elephant today, I'm not sure if this is correct, descended and evolved from the woolly mammoth or something like that. So they're saying that, you know what, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it like this. It didn't evolve from anything else. Now, many people have said this. But the issue with this is that the two are not mutually exclusive. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates, He creates using a mechanism. So think about you. You were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you were in the womb, you were nutfa, then alaqa, then you grew. And there was this mechanism where you didn't evolve, but you changed from that drop of sperm into the human being you are today. So there was a mechanism that brought you here. But at the same time, Allah was the one controlling the mechanism. So the fact that there's a mechanism involved for evolution doesn't mean it's taking the creator out of the picture. That's something we need to get clear in our heads, because it deflects from the topic at hand when we really want to get to the problem of that evolution has. So this is a fundamental error. The fact that something has a process doesn't mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't do it. And I have to think about yourself. The issue Islamically is with Adam alayhi salam. No, I don't mean with Adam alayhi salam himself, with the creation of Adam alayhi salam, because we see inna mathala Isa inda Allahi ka mathali Adam khalaqahu min turab thumma qala lahu kun fayakun. The Quran is categoric that Adam alayhi salam did not evolve from a prior species. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam in teen, and whatever the proper explanation of that is, that's for another topic. But Adam alayhi salam was not evolved. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likens him to Isa alayhi salam, or likens Isa alayhi salam to Adam alayhi salam, meaning they did not have, Isa alayhi salam did not have a father, Adam alayhi salam did not have parents. So now, to say that Adam alayhi salam evolved from a prior species is going categorically against the Quran. So this is the where evolution and Islam basically come at. This is where the meeting point is. Adam alayhi salam, according to us, definitely did not evolve. According to the theory of evolution, all humans evolved from one human being, Adam alayhi salam, who evolved from a prior species, who evolved from a prior species, who evolved from a prior species. So that's where our issue lies, and that's what we need to understand. It's not about taking Allah out of the equation. It's not about all of these things. It's about Adam alayhi salam, and how do we understand this? So I got here three possible solutions, again, because we don't want to go too much in depth. So some people have taken to dismissing evolution completely and saying there's no such thing as one species evolving into another. And you get people like this who say that, you know what, nothing can ever happen. But this is a very difficult and hard view to understand, because we see evolution taking place in front of us in things like bacteria. So, sometimes you get a sickness and then you take the medicine for that, But then when the bacteria come back, some of them evolved, or some of them had the ability to be resistant to the medicine that you took. So the next time you take the medication, it's not that effective. And in the lab, you can see this thing happening. But this just proves evolution on a small level. Now, one of the very famous answers to this is we accept microevolution. What's microevolution? Meaning, like a dog, for example, I own a Bulbul, that's a dog. 100 years ago, that dog didn't exist. Farmers bred it from other dogs, and basically they got this breed of dog that never existed before. But that's microevolution, because one type of dog basically changed its characteristics and became slightly different. But you're not seeing something like a fish becoming a cat, or something on a huge level. So the second solution that people have proposed is, yes, evolution occurs. You will see over time the size of human, and think about it, if we believe that Adam alayhi salam was so big when he came down, then that means evolution took place, because we became much shorter today. So we'll say we accept microevolution. Within a species, there can be change. But no one has ever witnessed, as we said, a fish becoming an elephant. Nothing like that has ever been witnessed. So that's the second method that you can take. It is a possible method. It makes sense. You can defend it. But again, it's not what I would suggest, because with long-term studies, they have shown certain birds transitioning from one species to another, but those are still small. So the second option is we say, yes, we accept evolution on a small level, but we don't accept that evolution goes onto a larger level, right? The third one is what's known as Adamic exceptionalism. So here we say that we accept evolution 100% completely. But what happened was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Adam alayhi salam's creation was a miracle. So at the time when things were evolving and it was about time for a human being to come, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam's special creation and put him on earth at the exact time when you would have expected him to be on earth. So therefore we're accepting the theory of evolution, but because Quran is telling us Adam alayhi salam was the exception, we are saying we have evidence that is stronger, that says Adam alayhi salam is the exception, and therefore Adam alayhi salam and the entire humanity also, so human exceptionalism, the entire humanity was not subject to evolution, but for the rest of the animal kingdom, we do accept it. So these are the three methods that scholars have generally outlined. Again, there's not enough time for us to go into the pros and cons of each one, but each one of these are legitimate positions that you can take. Again, to completely deny any evolution is very, very difficult, because people can show you in front of your eyes a certain bit of evolution. So the second two, I would say, are legitimate positions. And now we're getting on to another completely different topic. So just wipe your mind off whatever we said now. We're talking about perhaps the most famous objection that any Muslim will come across, and that's the age of Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha and how to answer it in the modern world. So this is something that every Christian is going to throw at you, every atheist is going to ask you, how could Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam do this, etc., etc. Now, just as an introduction, so as times go on, societal norms change, and we see something that was normal 100 years ago, today it's looked at as weird. Now, a common example is the body shape that men preferred 500 years ago. So today in the West, men like women to look a certain way. But if you look at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahaba, they didn't like women who looked like that. If you look at certain indications you see in the Hadith, they actually preferred women that were more like, not what you find today in the West. So preferences and things like this, they change over time, they change from culture to culture, and it's definitely unfair to judge one culture by the norms of another culture. So that's what we're just talking about here today. Now, what people today have done is, because in the recent past there's been some laws passed restricting marriage to the age of 18, people have used that to, and I don't want to say the words, to label Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as like this and like this and like that. So we're just going to talk about certain interesting facts that are important to know when you're responding to someone like that. Now, the first thing I'm going to deal with is perhaps the most controversial here. Is there a difference of opinion? So in the last 50 to 100 years, because the objections were so strong, you find that a lot of Muslims started saying, no, there's another strong opinion. Aisha radiallahu anha was actually 18 years old, not 9. 9 is incorrect, it's 18. And they started saying this is the real opinion, and they started pushing this out there because the objections were so strong. Now, from a scholarly perspective, you can't change something just because the objections are coming against it. You have to look at the evidence. And the evidence is that in Sahih Muslim, in Bukhari, Aisha radiallahu anha herself says that she was 9 years old. Right? So it's very difficult. Yes, there were certain scholars who did say 18, but those views are very, very, very weak. Right? So that's, from a scholarly perspective, that's one thing we as Muslims, alhamdulillah, we understand. But the other thing we need to understand, this might be slightly controversial, is that this is not a creedal point of Islam. Islam is about believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one, submitting to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The age of his wives, where he lived, all of these things are good to know as a Muslim, they're important, but they're not a creedal point. So when you're talking to someone who's interested in Islam, someone who's, just a revert, and this thing is troubling him in his head because he's grown up thinking that this is wrong, and it's troubling him, it's irritating him, you can see it's hindering him from coming towards Islam, then there's no problem in telling him there's a difference of opinion. There is a difference of opinion, you're not lying in any way, and this is not some fundamental part of Islam that before you accept Islam, you must believe that Aisha radiallahu anha was 9 years old. There's no such thing as that. So you have to sometimes look at the broader picture. Sometimes scholars are doing that. At the same time, we're not fudging facts. We know what's the truth. But again, priorities. You have to have priorities in this. Many people say certain things that turn people away from Islam because they want to stay on the haqq, which is commendable. It's commendable, yes. But you've got to look at the bigger picture here. So this is not a fundamental point of Islam. It's a point of history. It's something we as Muslims know. But don't make that a barrier for someone else accepting Islam. So if you have to say that there is a difference of opinion, you can tell someone, no, that's a difference of opinion, you can take this view, because there's a more important thing at stake here. So just remember that. That's one thing we're talking about, right? The next thing we need to talk about is that it's a relatively new objection. The controversy and criticism leveled against Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam for marrying a child bride is relatively recent. The Prophet's own contemporaries took no issue with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's marriage to Aisha radiallahu anha. This includes both his disbeliever antagonists and his believing followers. The people who were against him accused him of everything you can imagine. Sorcerer, it's all in the Quran. Sorcerer, madman, soothsayer. They objected to his marriage with Zainab radiallahu anha. Just remember that in the Quran, the disbelievers said, how can you marry Zainab radiallahu anha because your adopted son was before that married to her. So they even made an objection against his marriage with one of his wives. But not once did they ever object to the marriage of Aisha radiallahu anha. So they made every objections that weren't true, anything bad they could think of, they put it against Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this thing here, never ever, you won't find it. You won't find an objection coming from any of the disbelievers ever recorded that they had a problem with Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing this. Why? There's only one reason, because they themselves were doing it because it was the norm of the time. That's the only answer to that. So, yet they never ever attempted to discredit him on the basis of his marrying a girl too young for him. Now here I have some quotes, again we're not going to go through it, but we can see that the age of puberty, the age when a woman became baligh in Arabia, was known to be around the age of 9. It was extremely common, this quotes there of Imam Shafi, etc. I'll share the presentation with you all. Now here we have some quotes from secular scholars, and they're talking about something called presentism, where you judge the past by the norms and values of the present. So here, Mary Lewis, I think, is saying, unfortunately, many succumb to a fallacious form of reasoning known as presentism, an anachronistic misinterpretation of history based on present-day circumstances that did not exist in the past. An examination of history reveals that the definition and understanding of the term child is but a societal construct that has evolved and changed tremendously through the ages. So the definition of what is a child, think about in your grandfather's time, they would be going out to work 13, 14, 15. There was no thing about you've got to finish matric, then you've got to go to university, then you start getting work, then only you get married. As soon as you're of age, 14, 15, you take over the family business, you're getting married at that time. And that was carrying on for the last 5, 6, from the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam till about 100 years ago, that was the norm. So this idea of being a teenager is something that's very new. And it has been destructive in many, many cases. A lot of people have wasted away a lot of their life in this phase of where you're a teenager, your parents are looking after you, but you're still an adult, but you don't have any responsibilities. It's actually a very, very dangerous phase. So here we see that this idea of, a child, it's a very fluid idea. It changes from community to community. Now they're talking about the same thing here. So they're saying today we expect children to go through many years of schooling, 4 years of university, etc. No such conditions existed 1,400 years ago. The average life expectancy for a working class Roman citizen, why are they using Roman citizens? Because we have their records, was around 35 to 40 years. The average lifespan, imagine that at that time, was 35 to 40 years. Once you hit that time, it's highly likely you're going to die. If they lived past infancy. Why? Due to high rates of infant mortality. women had to endure 5 to 7 full-term pregnancies just to keep the population stable. Because children were dying, there's no hospitals, you're giving birth like that, many children are dying. Because of the wars, so many people are dying. Because of diseases, so many people are dying. To keep the population stable, women had to have at least 5 to 7 full-term pregnancies just to maintain the population. So how is that going to happen unless they're going to be starting as early as possible? And in more affluent families, marrying young girls also guaranteed the maintenance and acquisition of wealth. So now, what is this whole, now in today's time, we know the age of consent is 18, but where did this come from, when did it start? So the first recorded age of consent law dates back to 800 years ago in the year 1275. And people started saying, no, we need to have like an age of consent. This was in England. And that time they made it at the age of 12, but they still allowed people to be married so long as they were past the age of 7. So once the age of consent came about, the first time it did, it limited it to 12 or 14, but it said, you know what, if the families are happy and 7, it's fine. And you'll find that that was the general age for most of history when there was an age of consent. Now the Catholic Encyclopedia says about the Virgin Mary, radiallahu anha, it is possible that Mary gave birth to her son when she was about 13 or 14 years of age. If we look at Shakespeare's classic Romeo and Juliet, Juliet was only 13. Yet her mother tells her that ladies of esteem younger than her are already mothers. So what we're doing here is we're looking throughout history, that this was written by Shakespeare in that time. In his play, you can see that at that time, people at the age of 13 were already mothers. According to the Encyclopedia of Children and Childhood, both Christian canon law and European civil law considered 7 years as the age of consent. But judges in medieval England would approve marriages based on mutual consent at ages even lower than 7. And here I got a screenshot of, in the year 1920, look at the age of consent in all of these countries, 14, 16, 12, 12, 14. These are in countries like Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria. This is 100 years ago. 100 years ago, people were completely fine. 12 in Italy, I think there's 12 in Greece, sorry. And then no one batted an eyelid. This is 12, this was the law. 12 years old, it's okay. But now, 100 years later, anything below 18, and they'll call you a pedophile, they'll call you this, they'll call you that. So how can it be such that 100 years ago, the entire world was fine with something, and 100 years later, you're like a horrible person if you did that? So what are we understanding from this? That the law that we're using, the moral code that these people are using, changes, it fluctuates, it's not something stable. You can't use that to decide whether someone is good or not. And so these statistics are important to have in front of you. And in Christianity and in Judaism, we see that in Numbers especially here, that the ancient scholars in the Talmud said that its marriage with these female children is permitted as long as they are fit for cohabitation. Even if they weren't baligh, the Jews allowed it in the Talmud, and we know that Jesus authorized the Old Testament when he was alive. Now, there's a bit more to it, but I don't want to go too much because we only have 12 minutes. But this is a very, very important thing. So do I, someone living in the 21st century, do I have to say that if my relative who's 9 years old wants to get married, that it's a good thing? Because that's the question. Once we know at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it was the norm. Everyone was doing it. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it was something that was obviously mustahab. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it. But in today's time, when things have changed completely, in fact, if you look at the body structure of women throughout the last few hundred years, it's changed so that them giving birth at a younger age is even more difficult. Considering all of that, do I, as a practicing Muslim who loves Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who loves what he does, do I have to say that my 9-year-old relative can get married at the age of 9? No, you don't have to say that. Because the circumstances change. Think about it. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave his wife these houses to live in, certain clothes, certain food. Would we give our wives the exact same thing today? No, they wouldn't manage. It's impossible. They wouldn't survive on that. Because you have to, as the circumstances change, so too do the rulings. So yes, we'll say it's completely permissible, but will we say it's mustahab? No, we won't say it's mustahab. And the last thing I want to mention on this topic, this is the most important part, is who is Aisha radiallahu anha? Sometimes, we get so focused on this topic. We're talking about 9 years old, 18 years old, like it's a number. But this is the wife of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, It's a very, very great personality in history. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was asked which of the people is dearest to you. He said Aisha radiallahu anha. Aisha radiallahu anha was a great alima, a great scholar. Abu Musa al-Ashari says, whenever hadith was unclear to us, we would come to Aisha radiallahu anha to ask her the meaning. So in all of these debates, sometimes, now Allah protect us, we reduce it just to like a debate, Aisha radiallahu anha number. Aisha radiallahu anha was a great personality in history. We forget about, her piety, how generous she was, that once I can't remember which Khalifa it was, gave her a huge sum of money. And as soon as she took it, she went and she distributed everything to the poor until there was nothing left. And then the person who she had who was helping her told her, but what we're going to break our fast with? We're fasting today and you gave all the money away. She said, don't worry, Allah will provide something. So look at who we're talking about here. It's not, like something about numbers or debates. We mustn't forget that this is, a great person in history as well. And the last topic that I want to talk about is slavery. It's also a very touchy topic in today's time. I think before we start talking about slavery, we need to talk about what do we mean when we say slavery. So after colonization and the slavery of the West, the word slavery has a horrible meaning. You picture people taking people in chains, putting them onto a ship, people dying, all of these horrible things happening. So he says here, often the term slavery conjures up images of physical degradation, harsh labor, violence, complete ownership, subjugation. This is mostly due to historical accounts of the post-Atlantic slave trade and colonial powers. If this is intended by the term slavery, then Islam does not condone this, and any injustice of any kind, Islam does not accept this form of slavery. There's no doubt about that. And we read in the Quran, verily Allah commands justice, excellent conduct, caring for one's relatives. Islam explicitly abolishes racism in both the Hadith and the Quran. And we know that a lot of the slavery, not completely, but it had to do a lot with race at that time also as well. Although you did get black slave owners also in America. But the slavery of the West is definitely not what we're talking about when Islam does say that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had slaves, that the Sahaba had slaves. It was a completely different thing. Yes, we might be using the same term here, but it was not the same at all. Now we're going to talk about what is Islam's view on slavery. Now, if a Christian is coming to you with this, then in Christianity, I've got the verses here where he talks about you can take slaves. In Paul's letters, he tells slaves to obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, etc. So the Old Testament and the New Testament completely condone slavery. So no Christian or Jew can ever come and tell you that slavery is bad because it's in the scriptures, right? Who's going to be bringing this up? An atheist, someone who doesn't really have any religion, they're going to come to you and tell you, you got slavery, Islam allows slavery. What's wrong with Islam? How can it allow slavery? Now we need to understand that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Arabian Peninsula, slavery was the norm throughout the Arabian Empire, to Arabian Peninsula, throughout everywhere around. Slavery was the norm. The Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, address slavery extensively, assuming its existence as part of society, but viewing it as an exceptional condition and restricting its scope. So there was, it was, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam couldn't just come and say, remove all slavery immediately. No, Islam came, looked at what was happening, took away the evil practices, said, no, there is a case when you might need it, and we're going to talk about that now. But so when can a person ever become a slave in Islam? Only as a prisoner of war. So if you as an Islamic nation are there, another nation comes and attacks you. They came with the intention to kill you, to take your women and children as slaves, to completely destroy you. They came with that intention, and now you managed to defeat them, you managed to beat them. Now these were people that were about to kill you. So what should you be allowed to do with them? That's the context we're talking about. No, Islam does not allow any free person to become a slave. We're talking about a prisoner of war, people who are about to kill you. These are the people we're talking about here when we're talking about slavery. So what's the best treatment for a prisoner of war? You just think about this. They just attacked you, they lost. Kill all of them, that's one option. Or just let them go, and then 2 months down the line, they're going to come back with a stronger army and attack you. So what do? You can't, if you just kill all of them, that's even worse than slavery. If you just let them go, you're putting yourself at risk. So what do? You take them with you to your homeland. You treat them kindly. You show them Islam until they eventually accept Islam. And that was one of the ideas of slavery here. That yes, we're using the term, it's a harsh term, but it's more this, that you're getting them into the lands of Islam, you're giving them the opportunity to see Islam practiced firsthand. You're also utilizing them because it also adds to the much needed workforce in a usually dwindling population. Meaning they attacked you, they killed so many of your men. Now you lost part of your workforce. They should have to make that up. So all of these things and more make it such that this is the natural thing that has to happen to a prisoner of war. Because what are the modern alternatives to a prisoner of war? Guantanamo Bay, places like that. What's the other prison? So places like this where people are going there without any trial, they being held for I don't know how many years. Horrible things are happening to them in those places. So the modern atheistic understanding of what should happen to a prisoner of war is 10 times worse than the Islamic version of slavery. Way, way worse, as we'll see just now. Because if you look at the tortures that happened to the people there, it was absolutely horrible. Now, on top of that, Islam encourages freeing of slaves in multiple places in the Quran. And what will show you what is the uphill task? It is the freeing of a slave. And here I've got multiple Quranic ayat and hadith where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that whoever emancipates a believing slave, Allah will free every organ of him from hellfire in equal measure. Emancipation, whenever you broke an oath, whenever you broke a fast, also you could free slaves in atonement for that. So the Quran and Islam definitely emphasizes the fact that you should be freeing slaves. But now people make a comment, and I hear it very often. They say Islam came to abolish slavery. Now that's a contentious topic. Did Islam come to abolish slavery? Or did Islam come to regulate it, get them to become Muslim, and then you free the slaves? Because slavery is not something that just came out of the blue. It's a result and it's a response to the problem of the prisoners of war. What do you do with them? As long as they are prisoners of war, there's going to have to be slavery. There's no other option. So many people, in order to appease other people, they say, no, Islam came to abolish slavery. That was the original intention. But no, we see it being practiced from the time of Sahaba right through all of the empires. As long as there was jihad, as long as they were conquering, as long as there was fighting, they were slaves, because that's a natural outcome that's far better than the modern alternative. So we need to understand that in perspective as well. Yes, Islam encourages the freeing of slaves, treating slaves very well, but remember, these were people who came to kill you at the end of the day. That's who we're talking about here. So here I'm just going to quote from the Encyclopedia of the Quran. This is a non-Muslim writing. The Quran, however, does not consider slaves to be mere chattel, meaning like just rubbish that you can do whatever you want with. Their humanity is directly addressed in references to their beliefs, their desire for manumission, freedom, their feelings about being forced into prostitution. The human aspect of slaves is further reinforced by reference to them as members of the private household, sometimes along with wives or children, and once in a long list of such members. So these are Western secular academics who are saying, when you look at how the Quran talks about slaves, it doesn't demean them. It doesn't make them any less as human beings. It talks about them as being part of the family. And here's the hadith where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, your slaves are your brothers. God has set them as a trial under your authority. Whoever has mastery over one of his brothers should feed him from what he eats, should clothe him what he wears himself, should not burden him with tasks beyond his strength, and should assist him in doing whatever hard work he asks him to do. That's better than most employees get treated today in the workplace, right? And this is the law of Islam. The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is setting out for how you deal. So you can see this is very, very far from Western slavery. In fact, it's above what most workplace relationships are like. And here we see another hadith where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, none of you should say my bondsman or my slave girl. No, I mean, don't call this person your slave. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is even telling them, don't use this term like in a derogatory way. This person is my slave. Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, all of you are the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of your women are the slave girls of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave them other words to use. This is my young man, my young girl. Don't use the word slave because it's derogatory. So look at the respect that was here in this. And we look, because of this, so many great scholars of Islam, so many tabi'een, their fathers came into Islam because of slavery. So if it was what would have usually happened, they would have been killed and that would have been the end of it. But they were brought into Muslim lands. They accepted Islam. Amazing scholars from the generation of the Tabi'een, their fathers were brought into Islam like this. So you can see that the system that was set in place worked. It wasn't something that was just there for no reason. There's wisdom behind it, there's brilliance behind it, and we shouldn't be shy to say that this is what it is. Because if the Westerner and the American is not shy of saying he's putting people into Guantanamo Bay for no reason and torturing him, then why would we be shy to say, look at this beautiful system which has brought so many people into Islam? So we're going to stop there.
السميع البصير. الله الله إلهي أنت الحميد المجيد الرشيد الشهيد اللطيف الخبير.